Welcome to the Chess Channel. Any serious chess player is one who understands the moves they make. Many of us do not really understand the significance of each and every move, and this might be one reason why we never get to improve. In essence, you really need to be proficient at every single stage of the game. The opening is extremely important, the mid-game is significant, but what is the point if you lack in your endgame? With this in mind, let us look at one game that stands out. This game was chosen semi-randomly from a number of games held on this channel's database. So today we are looking at a classic between Mr. Tal and Mr. Sviridov, a game that was played back in 1969, when mankind first landed on the moon. For those who love their openings, keep an eye on what opening is used in this game. For those who wish to have more information on this particular encounter, Tal was visiting Germany and this was a simultaneous exhibition game in Stuttgart. Tal, playing with the white pieces, opens up with 1e4. Sviridov answers with the Sicilian and with the kingside knight being developed. Sviridov develops this pawn. The usual moves followed here. We saw d4, Sviridov takes. Tal captures with the knight, and with Sviridov now introducing his kingside knight into the game. Tal too brings out his other knight to be able to cover for his central pawn. What we are seeing is basically one of the most normal openings in the history of the game, using this line of the Sicilian. With the option of choosing something like a6, knight c6 or even e6, Sviridov opts for yet another move. It was this opening on the king side, and what he does is to introduce the Yugoslav attack line. This line of the dragon has always been popular ever since it was invented. With Tal opting for this type of continuation, Sviridov lines his bishop on the diagonal. Tal answers with this move to double secure the safety of this pawn in the center. And the continuation is always quite predictable. Sviridov finally introduces his second knight to this square. The weight of this game is on the center and who will control it. With this queen repositioning by Tal, and the idea is to get the king to safety. Sviridov can castle, but he is no rush to do so. He first developed this bishop to the 7th. Tal now castles long, and via this queen exit to the rim of the board, here kick in the tactics. Sviridov is provoking the knight to chase after the queen, but what happens if you do? If you back of the queen to this outpost, what happens if you chase after her again? Drop the queen back to the back rank, and all you manage to do is to scatter around a few pieces with no real progress being made. If we take back the last two moves, Tal was certainly looking at this line of play, but he never bothered. He got the king to move closer to this pawn on the queen side. Sviridov could easily have castled, but again he holds back. He knows the king would have no problem being tacked away safely, so he has no problem if he doesn't right now. He chose to go for this avenue of play, a solid rook repositioning to this square on c8. With Tal seeing no danger lurking on the board against his own position, he went full into attacking mode. Can you guess what he saw and what he did in the end? It was this pawn thrust to harass the knight. With Sviridov sassing out this potential attack on his knight, he introduced this move and immediately puts the brakes on anything like g5. But given the Magician from Riga was the person to beat, he was not going to let this attack on the knight die down. Therefore, what Tal here was to go it full throttle. He shot off with this guy, and the problem with chess is to become ignorant and go it passive. If you are passive, you are also inviting plenty of trouble, and this is exactly how Sviridov plays it. This is the move he went for, but how bad or strong was it? If this was to block the access to b5, then under the circumstances, this should be okay. a6 is a Najdorf signature and no one can argue the importance of this initiative. Is this, however, the moment in time which a6 can be played? Tal can't really start any attack. All he can do right now is to line up his pieces on specific squares. You start lining up pieces on the wrong side with the assumption your opponent will castle short. What happens if they castle on the other side? Given then board position, however, what is the likelihood Sviridov will or has any intentions of casting long? It's highly unlikely we are going to see this. So with Tal making an assumption that his opponent will go short, he started things off with this bishop repositioning to the second. With Sviridov having gone for this rook move to c8 earlier, this knight now on c6 cleared the way. Not necessarily a key move, but if you are planning to move the knight, it would make perfect sense to trade him for the knight. Capture with the bishop, of course, not to permit any nasty discoveries. Prepare now this bishop type of attack, and this is what you could be looking at. If you in time to get rid of the knight from c3 using the rook, Tal would be in for some treat. If you do manage this situation, Tal will be toast. There is a mate brewing in the background, and this is one position you cannot allow to emerge. Having said all this, Sviridov choosing for this knight jump to the center of the board, additionally allows a situation to emerge. He actually creates a real blow against him. This knight move to e5 is disastrous. We can probably easily understand why, and if not, what is the knight doing on e5? He has no clear targets. In fact, this is not entirely true. The main objective of this knight repositioning is to allow Sviridov to use the rook to land the knight on c4 and chase after both the queen and bishop. Okay, so we have clearly established the motive behind this knight maneuver, but let us see what Tal has in store. With basically something like bishop f4 or a queen retreat to the first not to allow the potential fork on c4, Tal doesn't even worry here. The move of the day has to be exactly how Tal went about it. Can you guess his follow-up response? He used what he did earlier. He used the pawn on the king side to attack the knight. The pawn was eliminated, and with this rook coming off, a very easy human type of continuation would be to just get rid of the rook. Let us examine another possibility, not here but a few moves back. When this knight is attacked, what if you were to come in with this fork on c4? Get rid of what? There is this rook takes on the king side, and there is this takes on c4. Which one is more important to pursue, and why? If you get rid of the bishop, you can either capture with a check, and when the rook is removed, you can now go on to get rid of the knight too. The other possibility is to get rid of the rooks first. The rook can now eliminate this bishop, and with takes and takes, can you afford to now chase after the queen? If you do, there is queen e5, but after you launch this attack, queen e6 backfires immediately. How? Via this knight repositioning. The rook here on c4 is ideal. He stops the knight's access to a nasty fork. What works here is this attack on the knight, but when you get confronted with this queen finding the edge of the board, you can no longer stop the access to c7. If you take and take, the attack on the queen with this move would simply not work. In with a check, the king is flashed forward, and this would be the pick of the day. How would you remedy the situation given this position? This is the way forward. Get rid of the rook, the queen comes off, and with the other queen also disappearing, when the knight bites the dust, the end result is crystal clear, and there is no need to continue from this position. Shall we see how Tal continues from this position, and let us come back to where we left things. The rook on the edge was eliminated as we know, but Tal here creates a real situation. Given he was one of the best players on the planet, this is how he did his magic. It wasn't rook takes like a normal human would do, but he grabs hold of this knight from f6. Sviridov at this moment in time was with the assumption he was beginning not to only breathe. Would you not be tempted to get rid of the rook with a check? For sure you would, and this is exactly how Sviridov continues. Now this rook can be captured using one of three pieces. We have the knight, the bishop, and of course the queen. There is only one correct way to capture. Any other way will drop the game. Can you work out how you need to capture this rook? Once you were able to do this, your mission would have been achieved. If you use this bishop to do the job, get rid of the pawn from the king side. If you now chase after the queen, simply back her off. Where? The best place to relocate her is here. Knight d5 will get you nowhere. Come in with this fork, and the key move in this position is not a queen move but this takes check. Get rid of this knight and after queen d4, takes, something now like king f8, and if you come in with this check, king g8 and Tal would run out of checks. If now you go for something like c3, this backfires. f5, knight d4, takes this pawn, recapture, and when the queen finds this spot on the board, Tal would be done. You can stop the queen's access to the pin by sending the queen to return to the first. But how would you deal with this queen invasion? Bishop b3, king g7, and even after something like a4, how would you be able to deal with this attack on the queen? Queen f3 to stop the rook's invasion and to swap the queen, and this would in fact work in favor of Sviridov. How? Take the queens off, come in with this attack, and right after you attempt to cover, simply come in with this check. King to the rim, and now get the king to march, and rest assured, there is no coming back for Tal, and this is only if he would have played it in the way we see things happen here. If you attack the bishop, there is not even a need to protect him as he is protected. Run with this pawn, and this would be it. There is no good way to stop this passed pawn without losing material and the game, of course. Another variation to look at would be here. Not queen d4 but queen e2. If the knight comes off to the bishop, we could very much get to see the same continuation. Just like any other game of chess, choosing to go for any variation, we are looking at millions of different lines of play. Even after knight c4, what if you try this type of queen response? If the two minor pieces do come off, the queen is still unable to penetrate on the king side, but given this position, Sviridov would have no trouble winning, and this provided he finds the right moves. If we use option number 2, use the queen to capture this rook, and again Sviridov would seem to stand stronger. Get rid of this pawn, and what we have is more or less the same sequence of moves in a slightly different order. If you however chase after this bishop, things do change. The answer you are looking for is this bishop repositioning. If you do take with a check, when this knight is recaptured, there is an imminent threat on the queen side with a mate lurking in the background. If you also get rid of this threat in this way, the extra pawn Sviridov has is basically all he needs. If you attack the knight, because c4 is covered, use it, and this would be the problem. Whether you trade the bishop for the knight, the end result would not change. By the way, is not a pawn different here but the superiority in the position. Normally a rook versus bishop, if not a great deal, but in this position, this is a difference you would not be able to ignore. If we now try option 3 of 3, this is the one that really counts, and this is how Tal played it. He removed the rook using the knight to expose the queens, and this is where it all happens. Can you find the way forward just like Tal did, and if you do, can you show your move to everyone else? And again, there is only one way to do it here. One step in the wrong direction, and would have blown it. There is only one way to capture the queen, but with this situation on the board, Tal worked out the real move of the day. Since the queen is in a way paralyzed to remove anything without being handed over, this is how Tal plays on. With a mate in one lurking in the background, this was the moment in time Sviridov hands over his resignation. Forget what goes on this side of the board, because once this pawn promotes even to a rook, you would have a checkmate. If you try this opening, promote, the king is flashed forward, and once you back off the queen to safety, there is nothing Tal could do or would have done. At best there is this knight repositioning, but it's too late now. If we try an alternative move, what does this queen move do? We are looking at a very easy mate in 2 with this queen moving to safety. Once the access to g5 is free, use it to deliver this check. And this the king being forced to the last, the mate now comes in 2 different ways. There is either queen h8 or queen g8, and this is how you end things. Tal back in his time was not just very hard to beat, but it was near impossible to even have a good game with him. Given what we saw here was a simultaneous exhibition, Tal was so precise in his game, he never gave a chance to the opposition. In some instances, yes, Tal lost when he took on others in a sim, and this is what we shall be looking at when we come back. I sincerely hope you enjoyed this type of miniature today, and if you wish to see more, you know where to find the channel. All the best for now, and I look forward to seeing you next time.